My purpose in being here is to talk about the fact that there are different ways to go through your divorce process in ways that will be supportive of your kids. And that's really a critical thing to keep in mind. I think Deb and Terri will probably talk to you a little bit about the fact that what's most destructive to kids is not the fact that their parents are divorcing, but the hostility that they see between the parents and the lack of support of the parents between each other. That's really what does the most of the damage to the kids. And so what we're trying to do as attorneys is let people know about process options. Just kind of narrowing it down even a little bit further, there's the court and litigated models he probably talked about, and alternatives such as collaborative or mediation. If you go on the alternative side where you use collaborative practice or mediation or some hybrid of those, as long as you have court off the table and you're focusing on the parties' interests and goals, that means your interests and your goals, rather than the statutes and the rules, it changes the dynamics radically. When you look at the statutes and the rules, that's what a judge has to decide in determining what's going to happen with your kids if you go through a divorce through the court. Or if you have court on the table but are trying to settle it outside of court, if court is still an option to the parties, then you still have to keep in mind what the statutes and rules say. For a judge who doesn't live in your house, doesn't know what's most important to you and your kids and to your co-parent, the judge basically has 13 things to look at in determining the best interests of the kids. It's statutory, that's all the judge can look at. But if you look at the 13 items, they're basically having the parents have to say that they are the better parent, that they take better care of the child, that they brush the child's teeth, that they have a better relationship with the child. Now, whether or not you feel that that's true about you, imagine if you got put into a situation where you had hired a stranger, an attorney, to tell another stranger, a judge, that you're the better parent, and your husband is doing the exact same thing. So now these two are then relaying information to this judge, basing it on those 13 factors about who's the better parent. That's going to be pretty messy. It's going to be pretty ugly. And then imagine how you would co-parent with this parent after the fact. So after the judge makes his decision, or after the two of you come to a settlement on your own, but having gone with statutes and rules and trying to say that you're better and the other one is worse, imagine trying to co-parent your children together after that. Basically, you have to have a conversation saying, all that stuff I said about you, I'm really sorry. Maybe you really are a nice guy. Some people can do it, but I imagine it's probably difficult. And the damage to the kids while that's happening, Terri and Deb will get into some of that as well. But what they're seeing is mom and dad saying bad things about each other, having custody evaluators come in and ask questions like, who do you like better? Who do you want to live with? Those are really unfair questions. They don't feel right to a child. And then the children then after that have to, when they're with mom, pretend that they don't like dad, if that's what mom is doing. And when they're with dad, they have to pretend like they don't like mom. So they're never really quite themselves. They're never really free to be who they need to be. Now, if you go with your interests and goals, and that's really easy to do if you're going with mediation or collaborative practice or something else where court is off the table, then you're focusing on your interests and your goals. In this scenario, you're going to be fighting about time with the kids and money. In this scenario, it's not so much a fight. It's more trying to figure out what everybody needs, what everybody's interests are, and I'm sure Ron went into great detail on that with you. But when you do this, the majority of our cases, there's some kind of decision about college funding. There's very often something in the court order about college funding. You don't get that in a court model. The court has no jurisdiction about child support after the child turns 18 to 20. But here, if you've made a commitment as a family that paying for a college education or a wedding or anything else that's significant to you, if you get that into your termination agreement, then the judge has to sign off on that, and then it's a court order. It's enforceable. So this is really a wonderful opportunity to not use the adversarial system and to try and figure out what's really best for the family. Then you talk more about what your needs are, what your interests are, and you actually define all of those items. And then you get to a negotiating table where the purpose isn't to say, I want to get the most and I want you to get the least. Instead, the purpose is, how can we create something that works in two households? We need to have two households that are safe for the child, two households that have adequate everything. So it just really changes the dynamics. And the stress In this situation, to kids, it's still there, but it's reduced. And the parents have a much easier time saying things like, oh, you know, I heard Dad took you to the park yesterday. That's great. He's such a good dad. You're so lucky. And Dad can say, oh, you know, I heard Mom helped you with your homework and you got an A. That's fantastic. It's an entirely different dynamic than the one over here. And it is possible.
We're the mental health folks. We're the dreaded mental health folks. And one of the things that got me into doing collaborative, neutral work as a child specialist is the fact that as a therapist for many years working with kids and families, I would be asked to provide some services for kids whose families were in court or about to go to court. And I realized that it wasn't a good fit for the promise that I'd made to kids and families about how this was a safe spot to explore your thoughts and feelings, about how this was a place that you could come and share things to help problem solve. If that turned around to testifying in court, even if the therapist had good information about the child, it was a violation of that child's contract. And I was working with 2 or 3 families, I think, at the same time, and I was in this space where I was trying to figure out how to preserve what the children were expecting, what parents were expecting too, from the family court process, and still provide mental health input, if that's helpful. So I've been doing this for about 6.5 years now, trying to learn more and more from the families I work with and the collaborative professionals I work with about how to keep kids at the center and out of the middle of their parents' divorce. But one of the things that we think we know about divorce is it's one of those times in the life of a child that can lead to some real difficulties down the road. And some of you who are thinking about, well, I have kids and I'm getting divorced, what do I do with this? How do I make sense of this decision in light of what we think we know about how kids fare during divorce? But I want to tell you that one of the things that all that data is based on are models that are no longer the best way to move your family through this transition. And that what we believe now is the hardest for kids in developing resilience and getting through this and growing up and feeling hopeful and all those things that we hope for our kids is that the conflict doesn't end. And that we know that there are parts of our systems, parts of how all of us have done it, trying to help families that have exacerbated this and kept the conflict alive. When I work as a neutral child specialist, my main client is the kids in the family. But my larger client is the family itself. I tell kids, you're going to be moving from a family under one roof to a family under 2. And I can be a helper to you. Your parents have helpers. They have really good people who are answering questions for them, who are helping them figure stuff out when it's really hard. And they think that you need a helper too, or would benefit from having a helper, someone who can answer questions for you and find out what's important to you. So I have the privilege of working directly with kids, but not in the way that people who are mental health folks have done it historically, doing things like custody evaluations, or being therapists who are subpoenaed and brought into court to try to testify on one side or another. I don't do custody evaluation work, nor do other child specialists who are in the field. We don't ask kids direct questions about where they'd like to live. We don't put them in the middle because that feels pretty crummy. Instead, what we try to find out is what's important for kids in how their family functions. What do they value? How have they learned to thrive? What roles and functions have parents played in their life? And what are their wishes going forward for how this would look when the family changes? And that's really helpful information to parents who are trying to figure the same thing out. How is this going to look going forward? How are we going to be able to provide our kids with all those roles and functions that have enabled them to do as well as they have? How are we going to do that? So the child specialist is brought on board to help in a neutral way find that voice and bring it into the room. And I know that there's a certain place where parents come. I've heard this from parents. I was kind of worried about what you were going to find out. What would they say when they're with you alone? And I have learned, as I learned as a therapist, the kids, even when they're angry at parents or hurting about something, are tremendously loyal folk. And they really do take seriously the opportunity to have a voice, to be heard, to feel like this is my family too. I can now weigh in on how it's going to look. And I have not had a single kid who's used it as a platform to air grievances, or at least not for very long. You know, if kids do air grievances, they tend to do it very quickly and then get serious about what it is that really they want to contribute to developing a parenting plan or helping their parents hear their voice. But that neutral space, if you have ever wanted a neutral space and you've stepped into it, you've said, oh, yeah, I like that. This person isn't taking sides and is listening to me for this period of time and will help me provide that feedback. So that's, in essence, what a child specialist is there for. Primarily, those of us who do this work are working on collaborative teams with folks like Anne and Amy. But there have been times when people have not formed a collaborative team, they're already en route to a different sort of dissolution, but still would like to keep the part about their kids from being decided in a courtroom, where the whole thrust is not to point out what are the other parent's strengths, but to try to point out what are the other parent's vulnerabilities. And they would like to keep that from happening, and so there's opportunities to use neutrals no matter what sort of process you're in. But again, as you're hearing today, I think to be thinking about a process that keeps you more in charge, that keeps you out of court, is really going to be, in the long run, a stronger place for your kids.
What a coach does is a coach works with either mom has a coach, dad has a coach, or my preference is that I work with the mom and dad together and kind of become their team. I help them through the process, whatever they need, so that they can go to the four-way meetings with their attorneys and they can be clear about what it is they need, what it is they need to say, how they need to be able to be, what if they need to have more compassion towards their partners in order to get through their negotiations, whatever they need. I help them try to focus on their child, because most people have children. Obviously, some people don't. I help them try to get through the trauma of, you've left me. How could you have left me? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I know? How could you do this to me? I gave you the best years of my life. Or I was the best thing that ever happened to you. What are we going to do about our children? This is going to hurt them irreparably. And kind of calm those waters so that they can move on, and try to find some compassion and help them realize that some things really need to be dealt with and talked about. And sometimes I refer them to counselors, and other things we need to just really deal with right there in the room. If it means talking about some of those issues, because sometimes if there's an elephant in the living room, you can't go forward legally. You can't do anything legally because it stops you, and we have to deal with it right there. Or maybe it means just saying, okay, there's some things we can't take care of. Let's move on. Let's do whatever we need to do to move on so that you can go to your lawyers and get things done. And my part is to do a parenting plan, which is a plan that the two of you design together. It's a blueprint for how you're going to parent your children. All kinds of questions come up. Who's going to take the kids to basketball? What schools you're going to choose? How you're going to make decisions? All kinds of things, so that you can make them now. Make those decisions now. And she sees the children as a neutral child specialist. I start working with the parents on the parenting plan. About when you're done, I'm done with the part of the parenting plan that needs to get done in order to satisfy you're getting divorced. And then Deb comes in and gives feedback to the parents. And then we finish the parenting plan in a manner to make sure that the whole parenting plan reflects the needs of the child. And that may be what we have left is the schedule and some of the holiday schedules, and whatever it is that are the real tough stuff, you know, the things that are really hard to talk about because our guts are involved in it. We really want to talk about what the children need and not what's fair, what you're owed, what you have a right to, but what the child right there, if we had the child right there on our lap, what the child needs.
That within the community of people who do this kind of work, there's more folks than just Terri and I who are doing this kind of work. And one of the strengths of having a team model, once you get over the, oh my gosh, another person I have to get to know, is
we're all very nice.
That we're there to sort of help you problem solve. And one of the things that I think is impressive to me about going through this process with the team is that we're all trying to use that interest-based assessment that you did at the very beginning to help you figure out, once this team has gone away, how are we going to do it? We're going to be co-parenting for a long time. Maybe not for all of you, but for many of you, you'll be co-parenting for a long time. How are we going to do it when those folks aren't around anymore? So the process includes in the office problem solving with folks there, neutrals and coaches and folks there to help frame it, to find the words for it, to get back to what the child is signaling that they need, so that you have practice. You're doing it before everyone goes away. The other thing is that if you are working with a team, many people on that team would be available to you later. You know that if your kids are at a certain level now, they're going to grow and change. So there's no expectation that even if Terri does the best parenting plan in the world with you, or you have coaches or your attorney or mediators are doing this wonderful parenting plan that fits right now, that's going to be the best plan in 5 years. When your kids are on traveling soccer teams or have whole other time-draining needs that you're going to need to negotiate around. So once you've assembled a team, your team is available to you for some follow-up. And that can be really helpful to have folks who you know understand your story, who've been there with you during this time. But we really place a high value on people practicing those skills and working it out, while we're completely honoring that this is a time in a relationship when trust and problem-solving skills are probably being taxed as mightily as they could be.
A lot of times clients go to attorneys first for divorce, and I think really they should be going to the mental health people first, because it's really a relational issue that's happening. But a lot of people do go to lawyers first, and when I try and tell people about the team, one of the first things that they ask is, how in the world am I supposed to pay for 2 attorneys, a child specialist, 2 coaches or 1 coach, and a financial neutral? And it is scary, and you know, divorce does cost something. It's just not free. I wish it was, but it's not. And there are certain issues that you have to resolve to get divorced, and so it's going to cost money. What happens if people don't use a team, if they just use attorneys? Let's just throw out some average numbers for attorneys' fees. If 2 attorneys are charging, let's say $225 each, then one